Hello, everyone. Welcome to our political science class, our American government class. I am Dr. Roger Cohen, and I am going to be your professor. Go ahead, settle in, welcome. We're going to begin with Chapter 1. If it's your first class of the first semester, well, welcome to college and welcome to American government. I want to start with a question before I say anything else. Take a few seconds to reflect. What is politics? Don't overthink it. Just think an answer by your instinct. Now go ahead and say it. Whatever comes to mind, say it out loud. You'll probably hear yourself say something like, it's about government. It's about power. It's about how decisions are made. And all of these are partially right. But by the end of the day, I want you to have a more precise answer. One that is political science, uh, once a political scientist would say, and would give, and I want you to have that answer as a political scientist yourself. I want you to see why precision matters. The first chapter in our textbook goes over vocabulary. It's a vocabulary chapter, and every chapter that follows, the Constitution, Congress, the courts, elections, foreign policy, each depends on the concepts that we build today. Power, authority, legitimacy, democracy, liberty, ideology. These are all load-bearing walls of the discipline of political science. If you don't understand them, the rest of the course won't really make sense to you. So let's work on making sense. Let's build the foundation. Let's just do this and let's see how well we go. Today, our learning objectives are 5 things you're going to be able to do by the end of the class. And I'm not just listing these as a box to check. I want you to see them as a checklist. When you leave from this class, and if you don't answer all 5, then you're not fully comprehending the course material. So, number 1, define politics, the state, and the public-private sphere distinction. It sounds very basic to define, but you'll see that getting precise about what politics opens up and what it is will give you a lot of answers you didn't expect. Number 2, distinguish authority, power, and legitimacy using people like Weber, Dahl, and Arndt. 3 thinkers, 3 related but very different concepts, and most people use these words interchangeably in everyday conversation. Political scientists do not use them interchangeably, like authority, power, and legitimacy. Number 3, I want you to be able to understand what a democracy is. I want you to be able to identify the type of regimes and classify democracy by that type. We'll see that a democracy is not a single thing. There's a spectrum. And some things that call themselves democracies aren't even democratic and the meaningful sense of what it means to be democracy. The 4th thing, I want you to explain the 3 concepts of liberty, negative, positive, and Republican liberty. It's the framework that explains almost every left and right-wing disagreement you'll encounter in American politics. Number 5, I want you to be able to describe the major political ideologies and in their 2026 variants, liberalism, conservatism, and socialism. So let's start digging deeper into our discussion. The word politics comes from the Greek polis, the self-governing city-state of ancient Athens and Sparta. The polis was a community of citizens who managed collective life together, debating laws, making decisions, sitting in judgment. The word politica means roughly the affairs of the polis, or the affairs of the community. So the modern definition we use, politics, is the process by which communities develop, contest, and therefore enforce the laws by which they live together. If you want to notice 3 things in that definition. First is a process, not a thing, not a building, not a person. It's ongoing. It never stops. Second, it involves contest. People disagree. They argue. They compete. If everyone agreed on everything, politics would be unnecessary. Third, it produces binding rules, rules that people are required to follow, backed by the coercive power of the state if necessary. And that last part is what makes politics distinct from, let's say, a book club discussion where you're talking about your favorite book. The public and the private spheres are what really come to question. The public and private spheres raises an immediate question: what does politics apply to? And this is where the concept of the public versus the private sphere comes in. The public sphere refers to issues of collective welfare, things that affect everyone, that require collective decisions, like national defense, tax policy, environmental regulation, public health. The private sphere refers to things like in your personal life, your religious beliefs, your family structure, your aesthetic preferences, your intimate relationships. In the classical liberal tradition, which is the foundational to American political thought, it draws on a sharp line between these two. John Stuart Mill's harm principle said that the state may only interfere with individual conduct when it causes harm to others. Everything else is your own business. This is the philosophical basis for things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to be left alone. But two very important traditions challenge this line. Modern feminists argue that the personal is political, and gender inequality doesn't just happen in public institutions. It's embedded in private relationships, in the home, and the wage gap, and who does the housework. If you draw a hard public-private line, you end up protecting private arrangements that perpetuate public inequality. Marxists make a similar point. What looks like private economic activity and employers paying wages is actually a political relationship between people with unequal power. And there's no neutral private sphere. So, I want you to stop and think about this for a minute. Think about, would you classify abortion as a public issue or a private issue? Would you classify gun ownership, drug use in your own home, religion, all these controversial political debates where we have disputes? Where would you have this as a public or private decision? Which brings us now to this discussion of who has power, authority, and legitimacy. The three concepts on the right side of the slide, the power, authority, and legitimacy, are related but critically different. And let me take them in order. Power is the ability to make others do what you want, with or without consent. Robert Dahl's definition: A has power over B to the extent that A can get B to do something B would not otherwise do. We call that pluralistic power. Power is a measurable influence. Stephen Lukes adds two more dimensions. Power is also the ability to set the agenda to determine what gets debated in the first place. If a powerful actor can keep a topic off the table entirely, they are exercising power even when no one's forcing them to do anything. And the deepest form of power, Lukes argues, is the power to shape preferences, to make people want what the powerful want them to want. So and our third one is ideology, and ideology is the third face of power. Authority is the power that people accept as legitimate. An armed robber has power. He can make you give him your wallet, but he doesn't have authority over you. A police officer who lawfully stops your car has both power and authority. You comply not just because she or he could force you, but because you accept that she has the right to ask you. And legitimacy is the quality that transforms raw power into rightful rule. Max Weber identified three types. He called them traditional legitimacy, which is authority derived from custom, habit, or history. It's the king that rules because kings have always ruled. And there's charismatic legitimacy, which is authority derived from the extraordinary personal matters or qualities of the leader. People who follow because they believe in the person. The third is the rational legal legitimacy, where authority derives from the law and the process, like the president who has authority because the Constitution grants it, not because of personal qualities or tradition. Modern states claim rational legal legitimacy. When the rational legal claim is successfully undermined, when people stop believing the process is fair or the procedures are followed, legitimacy then collapses. Max Weber's definition of the state is what we'll turn to now. Max Weber gives us the most influential definition of the state in political science. The state is the human community that successfully claims the monopoly on legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. So let's unpack that very carefully and slowly. Claims are the monopoly isn't automatic or eternal. It can be lost. Legitimate. It's not just raw force. The claim to use force must be accepted as rightful by the population. Monopoly. No other organization is allowed to use violence as a matter of policy. This is why the state licenses armies and police forces but prohibits private militias from maintaining standing armies. Territory. The state's authority is geographically bounded and successfully. What makes it a state is not the declaration, but the reality. If the government cannot actually maintain this monopoly, it becomes a failed state. Failed states are exactly what you would get when the monopoly breaks down, like Somalia in the 1990s, Libya after Gaddafi, parts of Syria, situations where multiple armed factions compete for control and no single organization can claim legitimate authority over the territory. This is also why non-state violence like terrorism, organized crime, or gang control of neighborhoods is such a significant political challenge. These are direct attacks on the state's foundational claim. The four major regime types are worth noting. Now, given a functioning state, how is political power organized and distributed within it? And that's what we define as a regime question. Political scientists identify four major types of regimes on a spectrum from most to least pluralistic. We have what's called a democracy, which is the political power flows from the governed through free elections, protected civil liberties, rule of law, and minority rights. The government serves the people and can be replaced by them. We have authoritarianism, where power is concentrated in the leader or party that allows limited pluralism but no free elections. Some civil societies exist, some economic freedom, but no meaningful political competition. Totalitarianism, that's the state seeks to penetrate and control every domain of life, not just politics, but the economy, culture, family, religion, and private thought. Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union are the textbook examples of this. The goal is not just obedience, but transformation. And then theocracy is the political authority that derives from religious law or religious leadership. The clergy or the religious text is the ultimate source of governance. Iran, since 1979, is the clearest contemporary example of this. And then now let's look at what is the difference between a liberal democracy and an illiberal democracy. And here's a critical distinction that does not appear in most people's institutions or intuitions about democracy. And it's one of the most important analytical tools in contemporary and political science thought. A liberal democracy means free elections and civil liberties and rule of law and minority rights. It's not about the political left. It means a system that limits government power and protects individual rights regardless of who wins elections. The United States, Germany, and the UK are liberal democracies. Illiberal democracies means you hold elections, maybe genuinely competitive ones, but you systematically erode the other components. You restrict civil liberties, manipulate the courts, control the media, rewrite electoral rolls to the advantage of the incumbents. Viktor Orban's government in Hungary is a textbook case. Orban wins elections, but he has dismantled judicial independence, taken over media, redrawn electoral districts, redrawn the constitution to make it nearly impossible to vote him out. Fareed Zakaria coined the term illiberal democracy in 1997 to describe exactly this phenomenon. The V-Dem project at the University of Gothenburg has documented democratic backsliding in 72 countries since 2015, including, to varying degrees, the United States, where Freedom House scores declined after and during the Trump's first term based on threats to institutional independence. We are still seeing a change in that democracy right now. This slide gives you four numbers that tell a story. 50%, about half the world's population, lives under some form of democracy. This sounds like good news. It's actually a historic high. 100 years ago, the number was close to zero. So the 20th century was a story of democratic expansion. 42. But those democracies, only 42 qualify as full liberal democracies by V-Dem standards, meaning they score well on elections and civil liberties and rule of law and minority rights. 42 countries out of the nearly 200. It's a small club. Many more have elections without the full package of freedom. 72 countries have shown measurable democratic backsliding since 2015. It's a concerning number. We're not just talking about places that were always authoritarian. We're talking about places that were moving towards democracy in reverse direction. Hungary, Turkey, India, Brazil. And some people even want to try to claim the United States. 3.5 billion people or human beings live under an autocratic rule as of 2024, more than the entire population in the earth in 1960. These are people who have no meaningful ability to change their government through peaceful terms. What these numbers mean for the course, democracy is not self-maintaining. It requires citizens who understand how it works, who can recognize when it's being undermined, and who's willing to defend it. We now turn to this idea of why liberty is contested. Isaiah Berlin was a British philosopher who, in 1958, delivered one of the most influential political philosophy lectures in the 20th century called Two Concepts of Liberty. His core argument was the word liberty is used by people who mean fundamentally different things, and confusing those things means political disaster. Here's the central insight: freedom from something is not the same as freedom to do something. And these two concepts of liberty map almost perfectly into the left right political divide in American politics and most Western democracies. I'm going to here add in a third concept identified by Philip Pettit because I think it completes the picture. Negative liberty is the freedom from interference. It is an absence of external constraints on your choices. If no one is stopping you from doing something, you are free. In this sense, to do it. The government should not stay, the government should stay out of your life, out of your business, out of your bedroom. And this is the core value of classical liberalism, libertarianism, and the traditional American conservative movement. The policy implications are direct. Taxation is a constraint on your freedom to spend your own money. Gun control is a constraint on your freedom to defend yourself. Drug laws are a constraint on what you do with your body. Mask mandates are a constraint on your freedom to breathe without covering. In every case, the negative liberty argument is leave me alone. Positive liberty is the freedom to, the actual ability to achieve self-mastery and to live a fully human life. Berlin's insight: you are not really free if poverty, illness, ignorance, or discrimination prevent you from making meaningful choices, even if no one is actively stopping you. A homeless person is technically free to sleep in a hotel. No law prevents it, but that freedom is empty without the resources to exercise it. The policy implications are equally direct. Public education gives people the positive freedom to participate fully in the economic and civic life we have. Public health care removes the constraints of illness from people's choices. Progressive taxation funds the programs that make positive liberty real. The state welfare state in this framework is not the enemy of freedom, it's the enabler. T.H. Green, FDR, LBJ all operate within this framework. When LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act, he was removing constraints that prevented Black Americans from exercising the formal freedoms they had technically had. That's positive liberty thinking. Republican freedom, the third category I mentioned, non-domination. Philip Pettit adds a third concept that I think is the most underappreciated. Republican freedom is the freedom from domination, not merely freedom from actual interference, but freedom from the possibility of arbitrary interference. And here's the key things. Imagine you have a kind, benevolent master who never punishes you and treats you well. The question is, are you free? Negative liberty says yes, because he's not interfering. Positive liberty says maybe, if you have the resources to flourish. Republican freedom says no, you are not free, because that person cannot choose to interfere. That person's master could choose to interfere at any moment. You live at his discretion. Your freedom is a permission, it's not a right. That means you will self-censor, defer, or shape your behavior to please the master, him. Even without a direct coercion, you are dominated. The political implications, the constitutional constraints, the separation of powers, and the rule of law are all mechanisms of preventing domination. No person or institution should have arbitrary, unchecked power over others, even if they're currently choosing not to exercise it. This is why, but he hasn't actually done anything bad yet, is an inefficient response to concentrated power for those who are consolidating power. I'd like to take our time now to go to the next slide and see, we start to talk about from liberalism to national conservatism. And in this slide, from liberalism to national conservatism, we're going to look at the buildup that we've had towards the vocabulary and we'll see how it gets assembled into political ideologies. It's a comprehensive intellectual framework that different political traditions use to answer the big questions about how society should be organized. The three major Western ideologies, or ideological traditions, liberalism, conservatism, and socialism, all emerged from the same historical movement that transitioned from feudalism to capitalism in the 17th and 18th centuries. Each tradition is a different response to the same basic questions that the moment raised. What is the proper scope of government? What does justice require? How should property be organized? Who should have power? And how should it be limited? And here's what's important now in 2026. Liberalism is challenged both by MAGA movements in the far right and democratic socialist movements of the far left. Conservatism has been internally transformed by the rise of national conservatism, and socialism is experiencing a revival among younger Americans while simultaneously being redefined. So we're not just studying history right now, we're looking at the change within our current framework of society right now. So let's define classical liberalism. It is the foundational political tradition of the English-speaking world. Its core commitments, natural rights that exist prior to the independent of government. Consent to the governed as the only source of legitimate political authority, and limited government as the guarantor of individual liberty, and free markets as the most efficient way to organize our economic life. John Locke was the pivotal figure. His second treatise on government, published in 1689, established the framework that Jefferson synthesized in the Declaration of Independence: natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Government created by consent, and the right of revolution when the American betrays its trust. So this is not ancient history, it's in our intellectual DNA of our American government. Adam Smith adds that the economic dimension and the wealth of nations of 1776, the same year as the Declaration, he said that free markets are guided by price signals and the competitive pursuit of self-interest, produce better outcomes for society as a whole than any central planner could achieve. The invisible hand, not benevolence but competition, coordinates economic activity without anyone needing to manage it. The division of labor increases productivity, and free trade without specialization. Limited government enables both. Now we start to look at modern liberalism. By the late 19th century, the promise of classical liberalism, or formal freedom for all, had collided with the reality of the industrial capitalism, and formal freedom without economic security was empty for workers in dangerous factories, children in mines, and families one illness away from destitution if they got sick, no healthcare rights. Modern liberalism responded by reinterpreting liberty in positive terms. T.H. Green, the British philosopher, argued that the state has an obligation to create conditions for which all citizens can genuinely exercise their freedom, not just declare that they're legally entitled to it. So FDR created the New Deal in American policy. He gave us Social Security, labor protections, banking regulation. LBJ's Great Society gave us Medicare, Medicaid, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts to follow. John Rawls wrote in 1971 provides the most rigorous philosophical defense. A society is one that resembles people who would choose from behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing whether they would be born rich or poor, talented or not, healthy or disabled. From behind the veil, Rawls argues people should choose a system that protects basic liberties for all while arranging any remaining inequalities to benefit the least advantaged. This is the philosophical basis for progressive redistribution that we have today. So today, in 2026, we see different changes within this, the libertarianism and the 2026 challenges. Under the current libertarian movements, we start to see things like Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State and Utopia argue that taxation and free distribution is morally equivalent to forced labor. The state has no right to take what you've earned to give it up to others. In 2026, classical liberalism and libertarianism face challenges from both directions. From the right, national conservatism rejects the liberal commitment to limited government and cultural neutrality. It wants to use state power to enforce cultural and national solidarity. From the left, democratic socialism rejects the liberal commitment to capitalism. It wants collective ownership or control of key industries. And from within these, we start to see a fracture within how our society operates to its best capacity. So we start to look now at the different definitions of things like conservatism and socialism as as functions. So Edmund Burke, writing in 1790 in response to the French Revolution, established the foundational conservative insight that political institutions embody centuries of accumulated wisdom that no abstract rational scheme can replicate or safely discard. French revolutionaries tried to rebuild society from scratch on the basis of pure reason and ended up with terror, Napoleon, and 20 years of continental war. Burke's lesson: be very, very careful about destroying what exists because you may not be able to rebuild it. This produces conservatism's characteristic disposition, preference for gradual organic change over revolution. Burke was not opposed to change. He supported the American Revolution, which he saw as defense of traditional English liberties. He opposed change that would destroy the institutional fabric of civilized life depended upon. We fast forward to the Reagan coalition, that united the United States under three things: economic liberalism, cutting taxes, deregulate, shrink government, social conservatism, protecting traditional family structures, oppose abortion, maintain religious values, and the Cold War hawkishness that he had with a strong military and confronting communism. National conservatism is the disruption of that coalition, though. Thinkers like Hazony, politicians like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley argue that classical liberalism's promise for free markets, individual rights, and limited government has failed the American working class, and manufacturing jobs are gone, communities are hollowed out, opioids fill the gap, and cosmopolitan elites who benefit from globalization tell the people who lost their jobs to learn to code. So national conservatism's response now is use state power. Tariffs to protect domestic industry, immigration restrictions to protect American workers, and cultural restoration to rebuild our community. Socialism and what it looks like towards 2026. Karl Marx's socialism begins with a specific economic analysis. In a capitalist system, workers produce more value than they receive in wages. The surplus goes to the owners of capital. This is exploitation, not exchange, for him, and class struggle, the conflict between those who own the means of production and those who must sell the labor, is the engine of history. Capitalism is inherently unstable because of the crisis of overproduction, and it generates not only economic inequality, but alienation and the estrangement of workers from their labor, their product, and ultimately their full humanity. His view was democratic socialism accepts these premises but rejects violent revolution. So socialist goals can be and should be achieved through democratic elections. So we see modern people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the Democratic Socialists of America represent this tradition in American politics. Medicaid for all, the Green New Deal, free public university. These are all key public expressions of this socialist democratic ideal. A social democracy is distinct, and important distinctions happen. They have countries like the Nordic states where they are capitalist economies with private ownership and competitive markets, but they also take care of a social welfare class. What they have is a generous welfare state, strong labor unions, and high taxes that fund universal health care, education, and social support. This slide here is the vocabulary map for Chapter 1. Every term here will appear in your textbook. It's an assessment of questions and discussions ahead. Let's keep them in mind and understand them, and please commit them to your memory. I'd like to thank you for tuning into this lecture, and I look forward to our next time together.